Wherever you're listening from tonight, whether you're nestled beneath heavy blankets, lying on a cool floor with a fan humming, or curled up like a sea snail in your favourite corner, I'm glad you're here. If you'd like, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to know where our sleepy little corners of the world overlap. Before we begin, a gentle nudge. If you enjoy these long, relaxing, deep dives into science and nature, consider tapping that like button and subscribing. It really does help this cozy corner of YouTube grow. Plus, it gives the algorithm a nice warm cup of tea and tells it that this kind of content is worth sharing. Tonight, we're going to drift through the quiet, beautiful story of something we often overlook. Sand. That soft crunch beneath your feet at the beach, the warm drift of dunes in distant deserts, the tiny grains clinging to your towel long after a summer swim. Each grain carries a story stretching back millions of years, shaped by fire, crumbled by ice, carried by rivers, and rearranged by the wind. Now, I'll say this carefully. I hope this video isn't too interesting. If you find yourself still awake at the end, wide-eyed and whispering, "Tell me more about quartz grain sorting," then I may have overdone it. But if you do stay awake, at least you'll come away a little wiser, and probably with a newfound respect for beach vacations. So breathe deeply, let your muscles relax, let the day fall away, and let's wander together through a story told not in pages or words, but in tiny grains, sculpted slowly by time. And just a small note before we begin. This video is for relaxation and educational purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice or a substitute for professional treatment. It begins deep beneath your feet, in a place where light cannot reach, where pressure builds in Sandor, and temperatures soar beyond anything a human could ever endure. Down here, the earth is not still. It churns, pulses, and melts. This is where rocks are born, not in a moment, but in slow, molten flows and heaving shifts that take longer than human history can fathom. Every mountain you've ever seen, every cliff face or pebble or distant hill, began its journey in fire, water, or the relentless pressure of time. Let's start with igneous rocks, the original builders of the planet's crust. The word igneous comes from the Latin ignis, meaning fire. Fitting, really, because these rocks are the cooled remnants of magma or lava. When magma rises toward the surface and erupts as lava, it spills from volcanoes in fiery ribbons and cascades into landscapes like glowing syrup. But eventually the lava cools, hardens, and becomes rock. Basalt is one of the most common examples of this. You can find it paving the ocean floor, forming dramatic cliffs in Iceland, and creating eerie hexagonal columns like those at the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. But not all igneous rocks form in such a dramatic way. Some stay hidden underground, cooling slowly over thousands or even millions of years beneath the surface. Because they cool slowly, crystals have time to grow larger, resulting in coarse-grained rocks like granite. Granite is the rock of kitchen countertops and ancient mountain roots, and it's one of the Earth's most durable materials. The quartz in it sparkles faintly, and the feldspar gives it that speckled pink or white hue. It is, quite literally, Earth's internal heat made solid. If igneous rocks are the fiery architects of the planet, then sedimentary rocks are the quiet storytellers. They form from the accumulation of material, sediment, over vast spans of time. Imagine a river winding through a valley. As it flows, it carries particles of rock broken off by wind, water, or ice. These particles travel downstream, settling in lakes, deltas, and the ocean floor. Over time, layer upon layer of sediment builds up: mud, silt, sand, bits of shell and bone. These layers are compacted under their own weight, and the pressure causes them to harden into stone. This process can take millions of years, and yet in the end, you get rocks like sandstone, shale, and limestone. Sandstone is made almost entirely of quartz grains, compacted and cemented together. Shale comes from fine silt and clay, often forming in the quiet waters of ancient lagoons. Limestone, perhaps the most poetic of them all, is born from the skeletons and shells of marine organisms, tiny creatures drifting in warm, shallow seas long before humans appeared. What makes sedimentary rocks especially fascinating is their ability to preserve the past. They often contain fossils, which are essentially time capsules pressed between layers. A dinosaur's footprint, a fern leaf, a fish skeleton, all can be held in stone for tens of millions of years. In this way, sedimentary rocks don't just record the Earth's physical changes, but also the lives that briefly walked across its surface. And then we come to metamorphic rocks, the shapeshifters. These begin as either igneous or sedimentary rocks, but their story doesn't end there. Under the immense pressure and heat found deep within the Earth's crust, these rocks undergo a transformation. They don't melt entirely, but they're changed, recrystallized, restructured, and reshaped without turning back into liquid. This process is called metamorphism, from the Greek for change of form. Take limestone, for instance. Under the right conditions, it becomes marble, a dense, sparkling stone prized for sculptures and cathedrals. Shale, under pressure, transforms into slate, which has been used for roofing and writing tablets for centuries. And granite, when altered, can become gneiss, pronounced nice, with its characteristic bands of light and dark minerals arranged like layers in a cake. These rocks often form deep within mountain ranges, where tectonic plates collide and force the crust upward, creating monumental pressure and intense heat. It's easy to think of rocks as static, as unmoving relics of time, but they are anything but still. The Earth's surface is a dynamic place. Tectonic plates shift and grind against each other. Volcanoes erupt. Oceans recede. Mountains rise and then crumble. And all of this movement continuously reshapes rock, cycling it through different forms. This endless transformation is known as the rock cycle. It's not a simple loop, but a vast web of processes that can send a rock on a journey lasting hundreds of millions of years. An igneous rock formed from volcanic lava might be weathered into sediment, pressed into a sedimentary layer, then buried and transformed into a metamorphic rock, only to be melted once more into magma and reborn entirely. The process has no beginning and no end. It is Earth's version of reincarnation, slow, powerful, and utterly indifferent to our human sense of time. If you could watch this process unfold in fast forward, the Earth would look like a living, breathing organism. Mountains would rise like bread in an oven, only to sag and collapse. Rivers would carve canyons with delicate persistence. Oceans would creep forward and retreat, leaving behind shells, bones, and layers of salt. And all the while, deep below, rocks would shift and fold and melt and reform, over and over again. The diversity of rocks on this planet is astonishing. There are rocks that formed before the first animals evolved, over 3 billion years ago, and they're still here. You could hold one in your hand, a piece of something older than complex life itself. There are rocks made from volcanic glass, like obsidian, which can be so sharp it was once used for surgical blades. There are rocks that glow under ultraviolet light, rocks that float in water. And even rocks made of once-living things. And yet all of them share the same basic origin story. They come from the Earth's inner workings, melted, compacted, or crushed into being. They are the memory of what came before, preserved in structure, texture, and mineral form. Every grain of sand you've ever stepped on began this way, as part of a larger whole. Whether it came from a cooling magma chamber, a layered seabed, or a compressed mountain fold, it started its journey as a rock. And even now, broken into tiny fragments, it holds the memory of fire, water, and pressure. You could say that rocks are the first storytellers. They whisper of ancient seas, lava flows, and forgotten mountain ranges. You just have to slow down enough to listen. In the end, rocks are not lifeless. They are just slow, so slow that we barely notice their movement. But over millions of years, they build and rebuild the world we live in. From the foundations of our cities to the sand between our toes, everything starts with a rock that was born in fire, changed by pressure, and shaped by time. Even the mightiest things wear down with time. Imagine a mountain range, jagged and proud, stretching into the clouds. Peaks of stone forged in fire, shoved upwards by the shifting of continents, towering over the land below like ancient sentinels. Now, imagine returning to that same range, not in a few decades or even a few centuries, but after millions of years. The proud peaks are no longer so sharp. Some have crumbled, others have sunk. Valleys have deepened. The whole landscape is softer, more rounded, quieter. This is weathering, the slow and steady breakdown of rock, the gentle undoing of geological grandeur. It works not with hammers or chisels, but with patience, repetition, and a toolkit filled with wind, water, roots, and even a touch of chemistry. And while it may be slow, so slow that we rarely notice, it is relentless. Nothing stands forever, not even granite. There are two main kinds of weathering that shape the surface of our world: mechanical and chemical. They often work side by side, tag-teaming the planet's crust until even the toughest stone yields. Let's start with the mechanical. Mechanical weathering, sometimes called physical weathering, breaks rocks apart without altering their chemical composition. It's all about forces, pushing, pulling, expanding, contracting, anything that can cause a rock to fracture, flake, or crumble. One of the most dramatic examples is frost wedging. Water is a peculiar substance. It expands as it freezes, unlike most other materials. That means when water seeps into the tiny cracks in rock and the temperature drops below freezing, the water turns to ice, and it grows. It pushes outward with surprising force, like nature's slow-motion crowbar. Over repeated cycles of freezing and thawing, the cracks widen. The rock splits piece by piece, flake by flake. This is one reason why roads in cold climates end up with so many potholes. But on a grander scale, it's how entire cliffs slowly fracture and fall apart, all thanks to the humble persistence of frozen water. Another powerful, though slower mechanical force comes from roots. Plants are surprisingly strong for beings that don't move. A tiny seed can find its way into a microscopic crack in a rock face. As it grows, its roots thicken and stretch, exerting pressure on the surrounding stone. Over time, the roots force the crack to widen, breaking the rock apart. This process, called root wedging, is quiet and gradual, but effective. Trees growing out of cliff sides and boulders split in two by sprouting saplings are visible reminders that biology has its way with geology. There's also something called thermal expansion. When rocks are exposed to intense heat, like in desert environments, they expand. Then, when the temperature drops at night, they contract. Over time, this expansion and contraction can cause the rock's outer layers to peel off in sheets, like the skin of an onion. This is especially common in places where temperatures swing wildly between day and night, and it contributes to the slow breakdown of exposed rock faces. Wind too plays its part. In arid environments, particles of sand blown by the wind can abrade rock surfaces, smoothing them down or even carving grooves. This isn't just theoretical. Some of the strange, sculpted rock formations found in deserts are a direct result of wind-driven sand wearing away the softer parts of the stone. Then there's gravity, never in a rush but always tugging downward. As mechanical weathering loosens pieces of rock, gravity pulls them down slope. Rockfalls, landslides, and slow-moving soil creep are all part of this process. Mountains may rise with tectonic force, but gravity will bring them low again, one pebble at a time. While mechanical weathering is all about breaking rocks down physically, chemical weathering works at the molecular level. Here, the minerals within the rock actually change into new substances, often weakening the rock in the process. It's a bit like rusting, but with rocks, and sometimes it actually involves rust. One of the most common forms of chemical weathering is oxidation. This occurs when minerals in the rock react with oxygen in the air or water. If you've ever seen reddish rocks or soils, that's often due to iron-rich minerals that have oxidized. Essentially, they've rusted. The iron changes form, and in doing so it alters the structure of the rock, making it more fragile, more prone to breaking apart. Mars, with its reddish hue, owes its colour to a planet-wide case of oxidation. Then there's hydrolysis, a process that involves water reacting with minerals like feldspar, which is common in granite. When feldspar meets water, it slowly transforms into clay. This isn't a rapid reaction, it can take thousands of years, but over time entire rock formations can be turned into soft, pliable clay soils, especially in warm, wet climates. It's like turning a hard, gleaming countertop into a mud puddle given enough patience and water. Carbonation is another subtle yet powerful process. When carbon dioxide dissolves in rainwater, it forms a weak acid called carbonic acid. This slightly acidic water can react with minerals in rock, particularly those found in limestone. Over time, this dissolves the rock, leading to features like sinkholes, caves, and the eerie landscapes known as karst topography. Stalactites and stalagmites, which grow drip by drip in underground caverns, are slow sculptures carved by carbonation in action. Chemical weathering is especially effective in tropical regions, where warmth and moisture accelerate reactions. Mechanical weathering, meanwhile, thrives in colder or drier environments. But the Earth doesn't separate them neatly. Most rocks experience both types of weathering throughout their long lives. A boulder might split from frost wedging, then slowly turn to clay through hydrolysis. A mountain ridge might crumble from wind and roots while the iron in its minerals oxidizes in the background. Over time, these processes break down even the most massive geological features. Towering cliffs become slopes, jagged peaks become hills. Eventually the particles are small enough to be carried away by wind or water, and once mobile, they're on their way to becoming something else entirely. It's almost funny, in a cosmic sort of way. We think of mountains as permanent, as eternal backdrops to our lives. We name them, climb them, measure our maps by them, but they are in fact temporary. They may outlast civilizations, but not the Earth itself. Wind, water, ice, roots, and oxygen, all of them will have their say. They will tug at the edges, slip into the cracks, and ever so slowly take the mountains apart. Even granite, that steadfast icon of strength, is not immune. It may take tens of millions of years, but it too will fracture, flake, and fade. A single grain of quartz within that granite might end up as a tiny speck of sand, tumbled down a stream and rolled by ocean waves, or buried deep within a distant dune. And that's the quiet truth. Nothing resists weathering forever. Not mountains, not boulders, not even the densest slabs of ancient stone. Time, with its patient tools and persistent hands, will reshape it all. It's hard to imagine, but every grain of sand on Earth once came from something much larger. A towering cliff, a buried granite outcrop, a volcanic mountainside. Each grain had a beginning far more dramatic than its current life gently resting on a beach or dancing in the wind. Sand may seem like the most humble material, but it is the end result of one of nature's most persistent processes, erosion. Where weathering weakens and breaks rock down in place, erosion is what gets those pieces moving. Erosion is motion. It's the difference between a boulder perched on a hillside and that same boulder tumbling down into the valley below. Wind, water, ice, and gravity. These are nature's movers and shakers, transporting broken down rock across vast distances and through countless transformations. Imagine a large slab of rock cracked by frost or baked by the sun. A rainstorm passes through, and water begins to trickle along its surface, tugging at the weakest bits. Over time, those trickles become streams, and the rock begins to fracture further. The loosened pieces tumble down slopes, bounce along riverbeds, and crash into other rocks. They chip, they flake, the sharp edges break off. What was once jagged and angular becomes rounded and smoothed, like a bar of soap used over years. This is how a boulder becomes a pebble, and eventually, how a pebble becomes a grain of sand. Rivers are among the most powerful agents of erosion. They don't move quickly, but they move constantly. With each passing year, a river will carry silt, gravel, and sand downstream. grinding the load against the riverbed and against itself. The particles knock into one another, a slow-motion rock tumbler driven by gravity. This process, called abrasion, wears down the edges of each fragment, turning rough shards into smooth grains. Some rocks hold out longer than others. Quartz, for instance, is remarkably resistant to both weathering and erosion. That's why it's one of the most common ingredients in sand, especially beach sand. Feldspar, on the other hand, breaks down more easily, transforming into clay through chemical weathering long before it can complete the journey. And then there are the stubborn pebbles, those solid little overachievers that refuse to reduce to sand. You can almost imagine them digging in metaphorical heels and muttering, "Not today." As erosion continues, not only do the particles become smaller and smoother, they also get sorted. Rivers and wind are surprisingly picky about where they deposit material. Fast-moving water can carry large, heavy particles, but as it slows, those heavier bits drop out first. Gravel settles before sand, sand settles before silt, silt before clay. This sorting process leads to the classic layering you see in riverbanks and sedimentary rock formations. Each layer represents a moment in time when the flow slowed just enough to let certain grains settle. The same principle applies in deserts and on beaches, where wind and waves do their own sorting. Strong winds can carry fine sand for miles, while heavier particles are left behind. Similarly, ocean waves tumble sand back and forth along the shore, filtering out anything too large or too fine. The result is often a remarkably uniform texture, grains of similar size, shape, and even composition. Sorting also has a big influence on the feel and look of sand. Well-sorted sand, where all the grains are nearly the same size, feels silky and fine underfoot. Poorly sorted sand, full of mixed grain sizes and little pebbles, feels coarser and rougher. That squeaky crunch under your toes at certain beaches. That's the sound of millions of rounded quartz grains rubbing together, each one shaped by centuries of tumbling. Sometimes erosion takes an express route. Landslides and flash floods can move enormous amounts of material in minutes, but most of the time the process is painfully slow. A boulder might take thousands of years to travel a few kilometers, gradually breaking down along the way. A single grain of sand might take even longer to form. It's like nature is writing a novel, one chapter every few thousand years. One particularly fascinating feature of erosion is that it often erases the memory of origin. Once a grain of sand has been rounded, sorted, and transported hundreds of kilometers, it's nearly impossible to tell exactly where it came from. It could have started its journey in a mountain range now long eroded, or from the heart of a continent split apart by tectonic forces eons ago. It has no label, no passport, only its shape, size, and mineral content as clues. Despite its humble appearance, sand carries incredible geological information. Scientists can examine sand grains under a microscope and determine not only what minerals they contain, but also how far they've travelled and what kind of environment they passed through. Angular grains suggest a short trip, perhaps straight from a cliff face into a nearby stream. Rounded grains, on the other hand, have been on the road far longer, tumbled endlessly in water or blown across the land. Some of the most well-travelled sand in the world can be found in deserts like the Sahara. There, ancient rocks have been ground down and carried by wind over vast distances. The dunes you see today are the product of countless cycles of erosion, transportation and deposition, with grains that may have once been part of a mountain range buried beneath the continent. And it's not just deserts. Some beach sand comes from coral reefs ground down by parrotfish and waves. Some comes from glacial meltwater, where grinding ice acts like a natural blender. Some comes from volcanic eruptions cooled into glassy fragments and then broken down over time. Every environment leaves its fingerprint on the sand it creates. It's a poetic irony that sand, the material we build castles with, the stuff that slips so easily through our fingers, is born from things that once seemed immovable. Mountains that reach the sky, cliffs that stood against the sea, boulders heavy enough to crush. all of them reduced to tiny shimmering grains. What was once a monument to permanence becomes something light, shifting and impermanent, and yet in that transformation there's beauty. Sand is not a failure of rock, it's the next stage in its life. It's what happens when gravity, weather and time have their way. Far from being lost, the rock becomes part of something else. Beaches, dunes, riverbeds, the floor of the ocean. It spreads out, settles in, and starts a new chapter in Earth's long, patient story. One grain may not seem like much, but together sand shapes coastlines, fills deserts, and forms the foundations of entire ecosystems. Each tiny particle holds a legacy of fire, fracture, and flow. And somewhere out there, even now, a pebble is chipping away, one stubborn fragment at a time, still resisting its sandy fate. But eventually nature always wins. And that pebble, it'll come around. Rivers don't shout. They don't demand attention with dramatic eruptions or sudden thundering crashes. Instead, they whisper their work into the landscape, slowly sculpting it grain by grain. What they lack in speed, they make up for in persistence. Give a river enough time, thousands, even vast millions of years, and it can carve through mountain ranges, build entire deltas, and carry continents toward the sea. At first glance, a river might seem like a simple thing, water flowing downhill, winding its way to an ocean or lake. But beneath that peaceful surface, rivers are incredibly complex, dynamic systems. They are transport networks for sediment, messengers of erosion, and tireless engineers of the landscape. Their cargo, everything from massive boulders to microscopic clay particles, all in a constant state of motion, reshuffling Earth's surface. Let's start with the basics. When rain falls on a mountain, some of it soaks into the ground, but much of it begins to run downhill, gathering into rivulets, then streams, then eventually rivers. Along the way, this water picks up bits of the rock and soil it passes over. It erodes hillsides, scrapes riverbeds, and collects sediment like a collector picking up trinkets on a long walk. This sediment can include silt, sand, pebbles, and even organic material, all of which becomes part of the river's travelling entourage. Not all sediment travels the same way. Some particles bounce along the bottom in a process called saltation. Some roll or slide, especially larger grains or small stones. This is known as traction. Finer particles like clay and silt are carried in suspension, swirling within the water itself. And then there are dissolved minerals that travel invisibly, chemically carried along. Together, all this material gives rivers their murky colour, particularly during floods or rainy seasons, when erosion ramps up and the river becomes a roaring conveyor belt of earth. The power of a river to move material depends on its speed and volume. Faster, steeper rivers in mountainous areas have the energy to move large rocks and coarse sand, while slower rivers in flatter landscapes tend to carry only fine sediments. This means that as rivers travel from highlands to lowlands, they tend to sort their load. Coarse material is dropped early, while finer particles make it much farther downstream. It's a natural filtration system that shapes everything from gravel bars to mud flats. One of the most elegant examples of this sorting occurs in river meanders. As rivers wind across flat plains, they carve sweeping curves, and those curves are full of quiet drama. On the outer edge of a bend, the water moves faster and erodes the bank. On the inner edge, the flow slows down and drops its sediment. Over time, this causes the bends to shift and grow, sometimes even looping so far they cut themselves off entirely, forming oxbow lakes. The river dances across its valley, never content to stay in one place. Now, let's take a moment to drift down some of the great rivers of the world. The Amazon is the largest river system on Earth, and it carries an unimaginable amount of sediment, estimated in the hundreds of millions of tons every year. It drains rainwater from the Andes, pulling with it particles scraped from young, rising mountains, and it fans them out across the vast floodplain of South America. The river's flow is so strong that its freshwater plume can extend over 100 miles into the Atlantic Ocean, and within that brown water are the tiny fragments of rock and clay that began their journey high in the Andes, now destined for the sea floor. The Nile, by contrast, tells a longer story. Flowing over 4,000 miles, it carves through deserts and delivers life to the arid lands of northeastern Africa. Its sediment, historically rich and dark, once nourished the agricultural fields of ancient Egypt, creating fertile banks in an otherwise inhospitable environment. While modern dams now interrupt much of its natural sediment flow, the Nile's past is written in the layers of alluvial soil that stretch for miles on either side. Then there's the Ganges, sacred to millions and vital to agriculture in the Indian subcontinent. It gathers glacial meltwater from the Himalayas and rushes it through valleys and plains, carrying not just water, but the geological memory of the world's tallest mountains. The Ganges forms part of the vast Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta, a landscape so rich in sediment it supports hundreds of millions of people. It's one of the most densely populated and geologically active places on Earth, all thanks to the tireless labour of rivers. And yet these rivers don't just deliver sediment, they also carve the land as they go. Over millennia, rivers cut valleys and canyons, some of which stretch hundreds of miles. The Grand Canyon, for example, was carved by the Colorado River over millions of years. The rock there is layered like a cake of ancient worlds, each slice a different era, each exposed by water's patient erosion. And while the canyon is dry and sunbaked today, it was water that did the work, drop by drop. Even small rivers perform impressive feats of engineering. They create floodplains, where seasonal overflows deposit fine, fertile sediment. They build levees, not the artificial kind, but natural ridges formed by heavier particles falling out of floodwaters along the banks. They form braided channels in areas with heavy sediment loads, splitting and rejoining like threads in a woven mat. Rivers are artists, engineers and storytellers, all wrapped into a single meandering line on the map. Over time, most of the sediment a river carries ends up somewhere else entirely, usually the sea. At river mouths, where flow slows dramatically, the suspended load settles out and forms deltas, estuaries and coastal plains. These areas are crucial for ecosystems, fisheries and even civilization itself. Many of the world's largest cities are built on river deltas, sitting on top of layers upon layers of sand and silt deposited by rivers over thousands of years. What's truly mesmerizing is the scale. A single rainstorm in the mountains can send a pulse of sediment tumbling into a river. That material may take years to reach the ocean, but it will get there. And as it travels, it shapes the world. It fills valleys, builds beaches, and replenishes coastlines. Without rivers, erosion would pile up in place. But with them, the broken pieces of the world are carried off, repurposed, and redistributed. And just when you think a river's job is done, it begins again. New rain falls, new particles are broken free. The cycle continues. The river never stops moving, even if you can't always see it working. A dry riverbed in summer might seem lifeless, but it's just waiting for the next rain to bring it back to life, to pick up where it left off, and to keep sculpting the planet in slow, deliberate strokes. For something as gentle as a flowing stream, rivers wield extraordinary power, not just in floods or rapids, but in their sheer persistence. They change the shape of continents without fanfare, etching their signature into the landscape one grain at a time, and through it all, they hum quietly to themselves, endlessly on the move, carrying the story of the land from its highest peaks to its deepest seas. Eventually, even the most energetic river must slow down. It can rage through mountains, carve valleys, twist across plains, but when it reaches the edge of the continent and meets the sea, the story changes. The slope flattens, the current eases, and the load it's been carrying, gravel, silt and countless grains of sand, can no longer stay afloat. The river begins to let go. What follows is one of nature's most elegant acts of surrender, the creation of a delta. Deltas are where rivers unravel. Rather than ending abruptly, they split and branch like veins, spreading out across flat, low-lying land. With the energy drained from its flow, the river begins dropping off its sediment, building new land as it fans into the sea. The result is a lush, muddy, shape-shifting wedge that blends fresh water with salt, land with ocean, and soil with sand. It's part earth, part water, and entirely alive. The process is all about balance. A river enters the sea full of momentum and material. But the ocean has its own energy, waves, tides, and currents that push back. The river wants to build out, the sea wants to spread everything thin. The shape of the resulting delta depends on who's winning the argument. If the river dominates, you get a bird's foot delta like the Mississippi, with long finger-like projections poking into the Gulf of Mexico. If the tides take the upper hand, the delta becomes more rounded and fan-like, as seen in parts of Southeast Asia. If waves are the major players, they smooth and rework the edges, forming crescent shapes like those seen in the Nile Delta. But no matter the form, deltas are built by sediment, layer upon layer of sand, silt and clay away dropped as the water loses its grip. The coarser materials settle out first. Sand often falls near the mouth of the river, forming sandy shoals and barrier islands. Finer silt and clay are carried farther into the estuary or delta plain, where they create muddy flats and fertile wetlands. These zones are biological gold mines. Estuaries, the tidal, brackish zones between river and sea, are among the most productive ecosystems on Earth. Nutrients from the land mix with tidal flows, creating feeding grounds for fish, birds, crustaceans, and a whole host of microscopic life. Salt marshes and mangrove forests thrive here, their tangled roots trapping sediment and anchoring the ever-shifting land. But behind all this ecological abundance is an army of grains, most of them unseen. Sand plays an unsung role, forming the physical structure of barrier islands and anchoring the shores of the delta. It may not carry nutrients like silt, but its stability is crucial. Where sand accumulates, land can grow. Where it's lost, erosion sets in. The journey from river to beach often runs through a delta or estuary. But sand has other pathways too. Longshore currents, those steady flows of water running parallel to the coast, pick up sand from river mouths and transport it along the shoreline, redistributing it across beaches, spits and dunes. Waves crash and pull tide by tide, dragging sand in and out like the breath of the ocean. Over time, the grains come to rest along the shore, tumbled smooth by water and wind. They pile up in quiet arcs where the sea laps gently. This is where sand begins its most familiar chapter, the beach. Beaches are fascinating contradictions. They seem simple, just sand and water, but they're the product of a complex dance between geology, hydrodynamics, and seasonal rhythms. Each beach is shaped by the materials available, the energy of the waves and the local geography. A steep beach with coarse grains speaks of strong surf and fast-moving water. A wide, flat, sugary soft beach hints at gentle tides and well-sorted sediment carried from afar. Many beaches are made almost entirely of quartz thanks to its durability. Other minerals tend to break down or dissolve, but quartz hangs in there, bouncing from mountain to river to shore with its internal structure still intact. That pale sparkle you see under the sun, it's quartz catching the light, quietly bragging about having survived millions of years of travel. Not all beaches are quartz white though. Volcanic islands like Hawaii are home to black sand beaches, made from basalt shattered by waves. Some tropical beaches gleam pink from crushed coral and foraminifera shells. Others are green from olivine, a mineral weathered out of volcanic rock. Every beach tells a different story, written in colour and texture, grain by grain. Tides play their part as well. Twice a day the ocean moves in and out, reshaping the beach with each rise and fall. High tide pulls sand offshore, while low tide lets it settle. During stormy seasons, beaches often lose sand to the deeper ocean, only to have it slowly return during calmer months. This natural give and take is part of what keeps beaches dynamic and ever-changing. A photograph may freeze the shoreline in a moment, but no beach looks exactly the same from one week to the next. And as the beach grows, it doesn't just stop at the shore. Some of the sand is blown inland by wind, forming dunes and sandy plains. These dunes act as buffers against storms and storehouses of sediment, ready to replenish the beach when erosion strikes. Coastal grasses and shrubs help hold the dunes in place, their roots knitting the grains together like stitches in a loose, shifting quilt. Sand doesn't always stay put. Waves may drag it offshore, currents may carry it to neighbouring shores, and storms can pull it into the depths. But for a moment, for a season, or maybe a century, it may find peace under the sun, spread wide along a beach where footsteps press briefly before vanishing with the tide. And it's here, perhaps more than anywhere else, that sand is most celebrated. Children dig castles, artists draw spirals, bare feet leave prints only to be erased. People stretch out towels and watch the sun fall behind the horizon, never guessing that the grains beneath them once travelled from distant peaks or ancient seabeds. Each particle is a traveller, a survivor, and a witness to the world's slowest, longest journey. The birth of a beach is never really finished. It is ongoing, continuous, and deeply tied to the rivers, tides, and storms that feed it. Deltas may build the land, but it is the coast that unveils it to the sky, layer by layer, grain by grain. And somewhere nestled in the warmth of the shoreline, a grain of sand rests, shaped by time, kissed by salt, and lit by a golden sun. Enjoying, however briefly, its place in the spotlight, stand on a beach, close your eyes, and you might believe you're standing on something solid, something permanent. The sand feels warm beneath your feet, the waves roll in with a soothing rhythm, and everything seems still. But beneath that peaceful surface, the beach is on the move. Every wave, every tide, every gust of coastal wind is shifting the sand grain by grain, gently but relentlessly rearranging the shoreline. The ocean, it turns out, is a tireless sculptor, and the beach is its favourite canvas. Waves are the primary artists at work here. They arrive at the shore, powered by wind and distant storms, and crash upon the land in patterns that seem predictable, yet are always slightly different. Some days the sea is calm, lapping at the edges of the coast like a sleepy cat. Other days it comes roaring in, tearing at the shoreline with storm-born fury. Regardless of the temperament, each wave carries energy, and with that energy comes movement. When a wave approaches the shore at an angle, it pushes water and sand sideways along the coast. This process, known as longshore drift, is one of the most important forces shaping sandy shorelines. It's like a slow conveyor belt running parallel to the beach, moving sediment from one end to the other. A grain of sand might start its life at a river mouth, get swept onto a beach, and then, through thousands of tiny nudges from angled waves, travel many miles down the coast. This sideways movement creates some of the most distinctive features of coastal landscapes. Spits, for example, are long, narrow extensions of beach that project out into open water. They form when longshore drift keeps pushing sand past the end of a coastline, creating a curved finger of land. Some spits grow so long they curl back toward the shore, forming features like hooks or even sheltering lagoons behind them. One of the most famous examples is Spurn Point in England, a narrow spit that has shifted and reformed countless times over the centuries. These features are fragile, easily reshaped or destroyed by storms and rising seas, but they're also dynamic, constantly evolving with the forces that build them. Barrier Islands are another remarkable result of the ocean's rearranging habit. These are long, narrow islands that run parallel to the mainland, often separated by a calm, shallow lagoon or bay. They're made mostly of sand and are formed by the accumulation of sediment from wave and current action. Barrier islands act like shields, absorbing wave energy and protecting the coastline from erosion. Despite their usefulness, they're not anchored to anything solid. They shift constantly, migrating landward or seaward depending on the balance of sand supply, sea level, and storm activity. Some barrier islands move several meters each year. It's a bit like trying to build a house on a moving sidewalk. Nature never stops adjusting the terrain. This constant reshuffling might sound chaotic, but it's incredibly well organised in its own way. The direction and strength of wave action, the shape of the coastline and the slope of the seafloor all contribute to how and where sand gets moved. For example, on the Atlantic coast of the United States, longshore drift typically moves sand southward, feeding the Carolina Barrier Islands and shaping Cape Cod's long curving arm. Tides also lend a hand, rising and falling each day, pushing sand back and forth in a slow rhythmic tug-of-war. During high tide, waves reach farther inland, rearranging the upper parts of the beach. At low tide, currents may pull sand back out toward the sea. Over time, this bidirectional movement leads to constant levelling, smoothing and sculpting. It's a bit like watching an endlessly edited sand sculpture, never finished, always in progress. Storms are the wild cards. A single hurricane or intense winter storm can undo years of gentle sand accumulation in just a few hours. Massive waves churn up the seabed, drag sand offshore and slice into dunes. But in many cases, the sand isn't lost. It's simply relocated. Once the storm passes and calmer conditions return, waves begin to rebuild the beach, slowly pushing sand back toward shore. The beach you stand on one year may look very different the next, shaped by the moods of weather and water. Interestingly, human attempts to control these natural processes often lead to unintended consequences. Seawalls, jetties and groins are built to prevent erosion and protect property, but they can disrupt the flow of sand and starve beaches further down the coast. By halting longshore drift in one place, these structures can intensify erosion in another. The beach, after all, doesn't recognise our property lines or desire for permanence. In some places, people even have to nourish beaches artificially by trucking in sand to replace what the ocean takes away. This is often done in tourist-heavy areas, where a wide beach is a valuable commodity, but even imported sand is eventually taken by the sea. It's a temporary fix at best, like sweeping a floor in the middle of a windstorm. Despite all this movement, beaches can feel like the epitome of stillness. People come to relax, to nap, to watch the tide go out. But the sand underfoot never really rests. Each wave that laps at the shore shifts grains just a little. Each tide moves the line between land and sea ever so slightly. Even when no one is watching, the beach is busy, reshaping, adjusting, rebalancing. If you could fast forward through centuries, you'd see entire stretches of coastline migrate, vanish or reappear. Dunes would rise and fall like slow ocean swells. Islands would stretch, bend and split. What feels eternal in the moment is actually just a phase in an ongoing performance. There's something strangely comforting about this. The idea that even landscapes are allowed to change, to move, to not stay the same. The beach doesn't resist the ocean's pull. It yields, it reforms, it adapts. And in doing so, it survives. So the next time you walk along a beach and see your footprints disappearing behind you, remember that you're just one participant in the dance. The grains under your feet were once part of cliffs and riverbanks. They've been sorted, rounded, lifted and dropped by invisible hands, and they're not done yet. The ocean will lift them again soon, give them a new resting place, and continue its quiet rearranging. Even when we are still, the beach is not. It shifts around us, beneath us, with us. It reminds us that nothing is truly fixed, not even the ground beneath our feet. And in that gentle, granular truth, there's something beautifully human. Now let the wind take over. Water may be the master sculptor of river valleys and beaches, but in the vast drylands of the world, where the skies remain clear and rain visits only as rumour, it's the wind that shapes the land. Without vegetation to hold the soil in place and with endless open skies above, wind becomes the great wanderer. And its favourite material, sand. This is the world of Aeolian processes, named after Aeolus, the ancient Greek god of the winds. It's a gentle kind of force, at least compared to rivers or glaciers. Wind doesn't roar in with overwhelming strength usually. It whispers, nudges, teases, but give it time and it can move entire landscapes. Grain by grain, ridge by ridge, it builds dunes that shift like waves frozen in place. Sand becomes not just the product of erosion, but a material in motion, a restless dancing sea of particles. Unlike water, wind has no hands to carry heavy loads. It's selective, choosing only the lightest, smallest grains that can be lifted into the air or pushed along the ground. Coarser materials are left behind, while sand is swept into the sky in short hops or skitters along the surface. This rolling and bouncing is called saltation, and it's the primary way sand moves in desert environments. As the grains jump and tumble, they strike other grains, dislodging them and creating a cascading effect. Windblown sand can move quickly when gusts are strong, but even on quiet days the movement continues, subtle, persistent, and nearly invisible. Over time, these wandering grains accumulate wherever the wind slows down, against rocks, vegetation, or itself. Small mounds become larger, slopes steepen, and eventually dunes are born. Dunes may seem like simple piles of sand, but they come in an astonishing variety of shapes and sizes. There are crescent-shaped barchan dunes that form in areas with one dominant wind direction. They have a gentle slope facing the wind and a steeper slip face on the lee side, where sand avalanches down in slow motion. There are linear dunes, long and straight like sand highways, sculpted by bidirectional winds. Star dunes rise like great pyramids, with multiple arms radiating from a central peak, often found in places where wind directions shift frequently. And then there are parabolic dunes with arms that trail downwind, often stabilized by bits of hardy desert vegetation. Some dunes are small enough to walk over in a few minutes, others stretch for miles, rising hundreds of feet into the sky. The largest dunes in the world can be found in places like the Namib Desert in the southern Africa, where sand mountains tower over the horizon in shades of burnt orange and gold. They are not just hills of sand, they are moving monuments to wind's quiet persistence. The Sahara Desert offers a vast and varied showcase of aeolian artistry. It is the largest hot desert on Earth, and though much of it is rocky or gravel-strewn, vast seas of sand called ergs dominate its heart. These dune fields stretch across thousands of square miles, shifting with the seasons, swallowing old caravan routes and reshaping familiar horizons. The dunes of the Sahara have seen millennia of travellers, from ancient traders to modern explorers, all navigating by the contours of shifting sand. Far to the east, in the Gobi Desert of Mongolia and northern China, the story is a little different. The Gobi is colder, rockier, and drier than the Sahara. Sand here is often trapped between stony plateaus or swept into compact formations by frigid winds. Dunes exist, but they are less extensive, more restrained. Still, the wind shapes the land with the same artistry, curling grains into delicate ripples or etching sinuous lines into exposed surfaces. And then there's Death Valley in California, a place of extremes where silence carries weight. In this low, arid basin, sand dunes rise like whispered secrets, shaped by the rare but powerful winds that funnel through the canyons. Here, something remarkable happens. The dunes sometimes sing. Known as booming or whistling sand, this eerie sound occurs when dry, well-sorted sand avalanches down a steep dune face. The grains rub against each other in just the right way, creating vibrations that produce a deep, resonant hum. It's not a trick of the mind, it's a real audible phenomenon that has mystified travellers for centuries. Marco Polo claimed to hear it in the deserts of China. Others described it as ghostly or musical. Today, scientists understand that grain size, moisture content, and dune structure all play a role, but the effect remains oddly magical. It's as if the dunes are humming their own song into the wind. Ripples, too, are part of this desert music. As wind pushes sand across flat terrain or gentle slopes, it organizes the grains into small ridges. These ripples form at right angles to the wind direction, and are often just a few centimeters tall. Larger features called mega ripples or sand waves can stretch for meters. They are like wind's handwriting, temporary yet elegant, erased and rewritten day after day. Desert dunes are not fixed. They shift with the seasons, reshape after storms, and migrate over time. A dune may move a few centimeters per year, or under strong winds several meters. As they travel, dunes can overrun roads, swallow fences, and blanket entire villages, but they also retreat just as silently, reshaped by the same invisible hand that built them. Despite the apparent barrenness, these shifting landscapes support life. Beetles scurry across the sand, snakes weave between ripples, and desert grasses cling to the slopes. Some animals have even evolved to surf the sand. The Saharan silver ant, for example, ventures out in the blazing midday sun when predators seek shelter, and runs so fast it's almost a blur. Sand isn't lifeless. It just moves to a slower rhythm. There's something mesmerizing about standing atop a dune, watching the wind dance with the sand. The horizon seems to stretch forever. Footprints vanish in minutes. There's no fixed path, no permanent mark, only motion, only memory. Every grain you see has been on a journey, carried by the breath of the earth, placed here for a moment before continuing on. It's easy to think of deserts as wastelands, but they're anything but empty. They are laboratories of movement, of balance, of resilience. And their dunes are a reminder that even in stillness the world is changing. Slowly, yes, but always. The wind never really stops. It pauses, regroups, then picks up the dance again. And the dunes? They follow patiently, like the travellers who trust the journey, no matter how long it takes. There are places in the world where the sand sings. Not in a metaphorical sense, not as the poetic murmur of wind over dunes, but quite literally, low, echoing hums that roll out across the desert like the Sabstund of distant thunder, or the growl of some ancient creature stirring beneath the earth. These are the singing sands, the whistling dunes, the musical landscapes that baffle hikers and thrill scientists alike. You don't expect it. You might be hiking through the silence of a desert basin, feet sinking slightly into the golden grains. The only sound your breath and the crunch of your steps. Then suddenly a deep vibration rises beneath your feet. It doesn't just reach your ears, it seems to pass through your chest, like a soft drum beat pressed into the air. It feels alive. This phenomenon has been known for centuries. Marco Polo described it during his travels through the Gobi Desert. Local folklore in many desert regions speaks of spirits, drums, or sleeping dragons. Even today, those who hear it for the first time often stop in their tracks, unsure whether what they're experiencing is natural or something more mysterious. So what causes sand to sing? At the heart of it, this strange sound is a product of physics. Singing sands are a real acoustic phenomenon, produced when millions of grains slide and collide in just the right way. It usually occurs during sand avalanches, when a steep dune face becomes unstable and a sheet of dry sand suddenly slips downward. As the grains tumble, they create vibrations, and under the right conditions, those vibrations synchronize. Imagine sand grains bumping into each other, billions of tiny impacts. Normally, those interactions are chaotic, just noise. But in some very special places, they fall into rhythm. The grains begin to move together, almost like a choir, amplifying the sound. What starts as a small rustle becomes a booming note, a sustained hum that can last for several seconds and carry across vast distances. To make this happen, nature must set a very precise stage. First, the grains must be well sorted, meaning they are all roughly the same size and shape. If there's too much variety, the grains don't move uniformly, and the sound fizzles out before it begins. The grains also need to be dry. Even a tiny bit of moisture causes them to stick together and ruins the vibration. The humidity must be low, the air warm, and the sand sun-baked and loose. The surface of the dune matters too. A stable, static dune won't sing. There must be a slip face steep enough for sand to avalanche naturally. This angle is typically around 34 degrees, the natural angle of repose for dry sand. Once the slope is disturbed, either by wind or a curious footstep, gravity does the rest. The grains begin to slide, and if everything aligns, the music begins. The pitch of the sound depends on the size of the grains. Smaller grains tend to produce higher frequencies like a soft hiss or squeal, while larger grains create deeper, thunder-like tones. The volume can be startling. Some dunes produce sounds as loud as 90 decibels, comparable to a passing motorcycle. But the sound doesn't feel harsh. It's deep, velvety, almost soothing, more vibration than a noise. Some dunes produce a steady tone, while others pulse in short bursts. Some hum like a didgeridoo, others emit more of a croak or bark. The variability is part of the allure. No two singing dunes are quite the same, and even the same dune may sound different from day to day, depending on moisture, temperature, and recent activity. Where in the world can you hear these curious sounds? A number of locations are known for their musical dunes. One of the most famous is in Badainjiran, China, home to some of the tallest sand dunes on Earth. The dunes there produce booming notes that locals once believed to be voices of the gods. In Iran, near the Lut Desert, dunes have long been known to emit loud, eerie calls under the midday sun. In North America, Death Valley's Eureka dunes are perhaps the best known for this. When the sand is just right, dry, fine and sunlit, an avalanche down the slip face will produce a deep, resonant boom that echoes off the valley walls. The Kelso Dunes, further south in California's Mojave Desert, are also known to sing under the right conditions. And in Morocco, the Erg Chebi Dunes have been known to hum when the desert wind blows strong across their flanks. But even in these famous places, the phenomenon is elusive. You might visit on a dry, hot day and hear nothing. Then, with a shift in wind or the gentle collapse of a ridge, the dunes suddenly come alive. It's a kind of natural performance that happens only when the world is exactly ready. An acoustic coincidence made possible by patience and precision. For scientists, singing sand remains an area of active research. Laboratory experiments have tried to replicate the sound using controlled slides in dry boxes. Researchers have studied grain size, dune structure, and the angle of avalanche to better understand what triggers the hum. While the basic principles are known, the full recipe remains a little slippery, like the sand itself. Some questions still puzzle researchers. Why do only certain dunes sing, even when they appear to have similar grain sizes? Why are some tones louder or more sustained than others? Is there a kind of feedback loop in the dune that enhances the sound, like the body of a musical instrument? The mystery adds a touch of wonder to the science, an invitation to keep listening. And there is something deeply human about the need to explain it. We hear a sound in the wild and we want to name it, understand it, fit it into our map of the world. But sometimes it's also nice just to pause and let it be what it is, mysterious, beautiful and fleeting. If you ever find yourself on a high dune in a remote corner of the world, with dry sand beneath your feet and wind brushing your cheeks, you might try sliding down the slip face. Sit back, press your palms into the surface and let yourself sink a little. If you're lucky, and if the grains are ready, the dunes might reward you with a sound that feels older than language. It will start soft. A low hum that rises into the air, passes through your body and settles into your chest like a forgotten memory. It won't last long, a few seconds maybe, then it will fade, like the end of a note played on a distant drum, and when the silence returns, you'll wonder if it really happened at all. At first glance, sand looks like the most ordinary thing in the world. You scoop some into your hand and it slips through your fingers, soft, fine and familiar. But shrink yourself down to the size of a grain, really zoom in, and a whole new world appears. Sand under the microscope is anything but ordinary. It is jagged, smooth, pitted, glossy or frosted. It can sparkle or absorb light, clump together or stand apart like scattered gems on a glass plate. Each grain is a tiny relic, a miniature planet with a long, weathered story. Start by looking at the shapes. Sand grains are rarely perfect spheres. They can be angular or rounded, depending on how far they've travelled and what they've been through. Angular grains suggest a short journey, perhaps freshly broken from rock and not yet worn smooth. Rounded grains have been tumbled and rolled for a long time, polished by wind, water, or other grains. The more time and distance, the smoother they become. Some even begin to look like translucent marbles or frosted sugar crystals. But it's not just about shape, it's also about what the grains are made of. And the most common mineral in sand by far is quartz. Quartz is incredibly durable. It resists both chemical and physical weathering, which means it can survive long journeys down rivers, across deserts, and through surf without falling apart. It's made of silicon and oxygen, just two elements, but arranged in such a stable, tight lattice that it shrugs off the punishment of erosion like a seasoned traveller with good shoes. Under magnification, quartz grains are usually clear or slightly milky. Some sparkle like bits of crushed ice, others look dull or frosted, worn by countless collisions. They might have tiny pits or scars, the result of grain-on-grain impacts during their long migration from mountaintop to shoreline. If you could hear those collisions, they'd sound like the tiniest clinks, a quiet chorus of time smoothing the edges of stone. But quartz doesn't have the beach all to itself. Feldspar is another common player in the sandy world. It weathers more easily than quartz, so you'll find more of it near the source, closer to the mountains or in young sands that haven't travelled far. Feldspar grains tend to be pink, white or grey, with a slightly cloudy or blocky appearance. They often look a bit less glamorous under the microscope, but they're just as geologically important. After all, feldspar makes up a large portion of the Earth's crust. Then there's magnetite. This one is a bit of a show-off. It's a dense, dark mineral, usually black or metallic grey, and it often appears in sand derived from volcanic rocks. Because it's magnetic, you can actually extract it from some beach sands using a simple magnet. Kids with science kits and adults with curiosity have been known to run magnets over beach towels just to collect tiny trails of iron-rich specks. Under the microscope, magnetite grains are opaque and heavy-looking, often mixed with brighter, lighter minerals in a striking contrast. Volcanic sands often contain more than just magnetite. They may also be rich in olivine, a beautiful green mineral that gives some beaches their unusual hue. Olivine weathers quickly, so it doesn't often survive long journeys, but in volcanic regions where new sand is constantly being created, olivine can be abundant. Beaches in Hawaii are famous for this. Papakalia Beach, for example, is one of the only green sand beaches in the world. Its colour drawn from olivine-rich basalt that has been broken down by waves and time. Green isn't the only surprise colour in the sand palette. Some beaches shimmer pink, like those found in Bermuda or the Bahamas. This hue comes not from minerals, but from microscopic shells of foraminifera, tiny marine organisms with reddish-pink skeletons made of calcium carbonate. When they die, their shells accumulate and mix with the sand, giving it a soft blush that seems almost impossible until you see it in person. Then there are black sand beaches, which are more common in volcanic areas. These sands are made from rapidly cooled lava, broken down into sharp glassy fragments. They're rich in basalt, magnetite, and other dark minerals. Standing on a black sand beach with the surf foaming against the inky shoreline feels like stepping into a monochrome dreamscape. And just like their lighter cousins, each grain still holds a story, only it begins in fire instead of frost. Some sands are nearly pure white. These are typically made of calcium carbonate from crushed coral and shell fragments. They're common in tropical regions with coral reefs, where fish, waves and boring organisms grind down reef material into sand. Parrotfish in particular play an important role in this process. As they chew algae off coral, they also consume bits of calcium carbonate skeleton. What they don't digest becomes sand. Yes, essentially fish-processed coral. One parrotfish can produce hundreds of pounds of sand in a single year. That soft white beach you're lying on, it may have passed through a few parrotfish first. Coral sands look very different under a microscope. Instead of the smooth grains of quartz or the cloudy bits of feldspar, coral sand grains are jagged, porous and often intricately patterned. You might see tiny spirals, branching structures, or honeycomb textures, remnants of the living organisms they once supported. They are like tiny fossils, scattered across the beach in overwhelming numbers. Even more exotic sands exist in corners of the world where geology meets chemistry in unique ways. In Bermuda, some sands glisten with flecks of red due to the presence of garnet. In parts of Australia, you can find zircon grains that are billions of years old, older than multicellular life. Some beaches are sprinkled with shell fragments, bits of glassy quartz, or even tiny bits of tumbled obsidian. Each location offers a slightly different blend, a custom recipe written by the landscape itself. Sand grain texture also tells a story. Smooth, rounded grains have been tumbled through rivers or surf zones, worn down over time. Angular, pitted grains might have blown through the desert, etched by wind-blown dust in the dry heat of aeolian transport. Some grains show conchoidal fractures, like broken glass. Others look battered, bruised, or beautifully polished. Scientists studying sand under microscopes can determine its origin, its mineral makeup, and even how far it's travelled. It's like forensics for geology. A single grain might suggest a nearby granite outcrop or hint at an ancient volcanic eruption. By analysing the mineral mix, researchers can reconstruct erosion patterns, track sediment transport, and even identify past climates. And you don't need a laboratory to enjoy this world. Even with a simple hand lens, you can begin to see the sparkle of quartz or the dull glow of feldspar. Sand collected from different beaches, deserts, or riverbanks can be bottled and compared, each sample a microcosm of a much bigger story. From a distance, sand is just background. It cushions your feet, slips through your fingers, and makes castles and dunes and shorelines. But up close is a cabinet of geological curiosities, a billion tiny relics shaped by forces far older and more powerful than we usually notice. A grain of sand may be small, but when you look at it closely it becomes immense. It carries weight not in size but in history, etched into every face, every crystal, every shade. Under the microscope, sand reveals itself not as a monotone mass, but as a symphony of texture, colour, and mineral memory. And all of it waiting quietly beneath your feet. You don't need a passport to explore the world's most extraordinary sandscapes. Just a bit of curiosity and a comfortable place to sit. Sand is more than the stuff that gets caught in your shoes after a walk on the beach. It's a geological passport stamp, a tactile signature of a place. Each patch of sand tells a local story, crafted from the rocks, weather, and life forms that surround it. And in some corners of the earth, sand goes far beyond beige and tan. It dazzles in brilliant whites, rich reds, and volcanic blacks, each with its own origin, each shaped by its own forces. Let's begin in the Maldives, a scattering of coral atolls in the Indian Ocean, where the beaches are so white they almost glow under the sun. Here, the sand is soft, cool underfoot, and made almost entirely of calcium carbonate. But it didn't come from the land, it came from the sea. These beaches are built from coral and shell fragments, ground down by waves and by the busy mouths of parrotfish. Yes, much of the sand in the Maldives has passed through fish. Parrotfish nibble at coral to eat the algae that grows on it. In the process, they scrape off bits of coral, chew it up, and excrete it as sand. One parrotfish can produce hundreds of pounds of sand each year. Multiply that by entire schools, and you've got enough for some very luxurious shorelines. The sand here is incredibly fine and nearly pure white, reflecting sunlight so well that the beaches remain comfortable to walk on even in the hottest part of the day. The clarity of the water combined with the brilliance of the sand creates that signature turquoise glow, and because there's little in the way of heavy minerals or coarse grains, the sand behaves more like sifted flour than gritty sediment. Now trade that dazzling white for deep crimson. We're heading to the Namib Desert, where some of the oldest sand dunes in the world rise like rusted waves along the western edge of southern Africa. The sand here is ancient, some of it over 1 billion years old, and it's coloured by iron oxide, the same compound that gives Mars its red tint. These dunes, shaped by wind and time, are often so tall they cast shadows that stretch for kilometers across the desert floor. The most iconic among them is Dune 45, a sinuous ridge that rises sharply against the morning sky, glowing orange as the sun climbs. Climbing to the top is no easy feat. Each step sinks slightly, the soft, dry sand resisting your effort, but the view is worth it. From above, the sand stretches in all directions, a sea of red swells, frozen in place. These dunes are constantly moving, though slowly. The wind shapes and reshapes them, smoothing their edges, shifting their crests, giving the impression that the desert is breathing. Despite the harshness, life exists here. Beetles collect water droplets on their backs. Oryx navigate the dunes in search of shade and sparse vegetation. And the sand itself holds traces of ancient rivers and long-lost ecosystems buried beneath the surface. The Namib is not just a desert, it's a museum of geological time, etched in red grains and wind-carved ridges. From Africa, drift west across the Atlantic to South America's Lençóis Maranhenses in Brazil. At first glance, it doesn't seem real. Miles of white dunes undulate like a minimalist painting, sweeping arcs of sand interrupted by pools of bright blue fresh water. These lagoons form during the rainy season, when the dunes capture and hold rainwater in natural basins, creating an otherworldly landscape where it looks like the Sahara took a dip in the tropics. The sand here is primarily quartz, carried by rivers and blown inland by strong Atlantic winds. The constant interplay between rain, sand and wind creates a seasonal miracle, dry and surreal in the dry season, dreamlike and lush when the water fills the low spots. It's one of the few places on Earth where you can swim between dunes, the heat of the sand giving way to cool, crystalline water just a few steps away. Now continue west across the Pacific to Hawaii, where sand takes on its darkest, most dramatic form. The beaches here are often born of fire, black sand made from volcanic basalt. When lava reaches the ocean, it cools rapidly and shatters into tiny fragments, some of which wash ashore to become striking black beaches. Punaluu Beach on the Big Island is perhaps the most famous. Here, jet black sand lies in stark contrast to the foamy white surf and the bright green of coconut palms swaying overhead. It's coarse, a little crunchy underfoot, and rich in magnetite and other heavy minerals. Sea turtles often nest in this dramatic setting, hauling their bodies over the dark shore to lay eggs in the volcanic warmth. But Hawaii also surprises with its variety. At Papakalea, near the southern tip of the Big Island, you'll find green sand, a rarity in the world. This colour comes from olivine, a mineral abundant in the volcanic rock of the nearby cinder cone. The grains glitter in the sun, a blend of olive and gold, like crushed emeralds spread across the coast. It's one of only a handful of green sand beaches in the world, and reaching it requires a long hike through wind-blown hills and lava fields. Further north in Iceland, beaches like Reynisfjara showcase black sand in dramatic fashion. Towering basalt columns rise behind the shore, while crashing Atlantic waves sculpt the coastline. The sand here is gritty and cold, a reminder of the volcanic forces that continue to shape the island. It's not the place for sunbathing, but it is a place for awe. Of course, not all stunning sands are remote or exotic. Pink Sand Beach in the Bahamas glows with a warm blush thanks to crushed coral and the remains of foraminifera, tiny marine creatures with red shells. On Scotland's west coast you'll find white sand beaches rivaling any tropical postcard, framed by turquoise waters and wind-swept heather. In the American Southwest, the dunes of White Sands National Park shimmer bright white, composed almost entirely of gypsum, a mineral that is rarely found in sandform because it dissolves in water. But here, in the dry Tularosa Basin, it persists, forming the largest gypsum dune field in the world. No matter the colour or location, sandscapes evoke a sense of stillness and motion all at once. They are shaped by powerful forces, volcanoes, rivers, waves, wind, and yet they feel peaceful, even meditative. You can walk for hours across a dune field or sit quietly by the sea, and the sand will simply be there, shifting a little, warming your skin, catching the light. Just so. Each type of sand carries the signature of its environment. White sand tells of coral reefs and gentle tides. Red sand speaks of oxidized iron and time-worn deserts. Black sand whispers of fire and cooling lava. Green sand hints at deep earth minerals brought to the surface by violent birth. And pink sand, delicate and rare, is the product of life and death in the shallow sea. These are not just colours and textures, they are geological fingerprints. The world writes its history in sediment, and the sand beneath your feet is a chapter waiting to be read. You can travel continents by looking closely at a handful of grains, and all you have to do is sit still, maybe wiggle your toes a bit, and let the sand tell its story. Take a stroll along a quiet beach and everything might seem still. The sand feels smooth, the air salty, the waves roll in and out with a rhythm that feels timeless. But what you can't see, what lies just beneath your feet, is a whole bustling world of creatures going about their day or night, or some strange cycle in between. Because while sand may appear empty, it's actually a thriving habitat packed with some of the most overlooked residents on Earth. Welcome to the world of interstitial life. That's the scientific term for the living things that make their homes between the grains of sand. These tiny organisms spend their entire lives slipping between particles, navigating a labyrinth of microscopic alleyways, no bigger than the gap between one quartz grain and the next. It's the kind of place that doesn't show up in postcards or tourist brochures, but if you had the ability to shrink down to the size of a grain yourself, you'd see a vibrant and surprisingly active ecosystem beneath the soles of your feet. Let's start with the meiofauna, a wonderfully obscure word that refers to animals that are smaller than 0.5 millimetre, but still complex and multicelled. They're not bacteria or protozoa, they're tiny worms, crustaceans and other invertebrates, and they live full lives in the spaces between sand grains. You won't spot them with the naked eye, but under a microscope, they appear like creatures from a science fiction film, transparent, wriggling and absolutely alien. Some of the most common meiofauna are nematodes, which are tiny thread-like worms found almost everywhere on Earth. In sandy shores, they play a key role in breaking down organic material and cycling nutrients. Then there are copepods, tiny crustaceans with long antennae and a jerky swimming motion. Tardigrades, famously nicknamed water bears, also make appearances in moist sandy environments. These microscopic marvels are known for their ability to survive extreme conditions, from boiling temperatures to the vacuum of space. And yet, here they are, thriving in beach sand. These creatures are not aimless drifters. They move with purpose, feeding on detritus, bacteria and microscopic algae that collect between the grains. In doing so, they help recycle nutrients and oxygenate the upper layers of sand. Their presence is part of what makes coastal ecosystems so productive. Even in places that seem dry and lifeless, life is threading its way through the spaces in between. But not everything is microscopic. Some sandy residents are quite visible if you know where to look, and when. Take ghost crabs, for example. These pale, almost translucent crustaceans haunt the high tide line, darting across the beach like nervous comedians. They're fast, alert, and usually disappear into their burrows the moment you approach. If you've ever seen a flurry of tiny holes in the sand near the dunes, chances are good you were looking at ghost crab real estate. These crabs are engineers in their own right. They dig long, winding tunnels into the sand to stay cool during the heat of the day. At night, they emerge to scavenge for food, anything from seaweed to the occasional smaller animal. Their large eyes are perched on stalks, giving them nearly 360 degrees of vision. It's as if they were designed to be beach spies, always aware, always ready to vanish. Further down the intertidal zone, burrowing worms make their home. Some are polychaetes, bristly worms with paddle-like appendages that help them move through wet sand. Others are smooth, streamlined, and capable of digging with surprising speed. Many build mucus-lined tunnels and live within them like underwater hobbits, popping out to catch particles of organic matter or algae brought in by the tide. Then there's the humble but crucial lugworm. This deposit-feeding worm ingests sand, digests the organic matter within it, and leaves behind coiled piles that look like tiny spaghetti mounds. If you've ever walked across a muddy beach at low tide and wondered what all those swirly sand sculptures were, now you know. Lugworms play a vital role in aerating the sediment, much like earthworms in a garden. They turn the sand over, process it, and keep it healthy for other organisms. And who could forget the mole crab, or sand flea? These tiny humpbacked crustaceans live in the swash zone, where waves rush up and down the beach. At high tide, they bury themselves backwards into the sand, using their antennae to filter plankton and organic particles from the water. Their strategy is simple but effective. Go where the buffet is constantly refreshed by the surf. They can bury themselves in less than 2 seconds and are often present in staggering numbers, despite being nearly invisible while at rest. Even clams and bivalves get in on the action. Donax, also known as coquina clams, are small colourful shellfish found along many sandy coasts. They live just beneath the surface and move with the tides, sometimes in dense colonies. When the waves recede, they can be seen wiggling furiously to rebury themselves, a glittering mosaic of pastel shells in motion. For birds like sanderlings and sandpipers, these small creatures are a feast. Watch a shorebird scurry along the surf line, and you're witnessing a finely tuned predator at work, poking and prodding in search of buried bounty. The beach may look still to us, but to the birds, it's a buffet line. And then, of course, there's the microbial layer, bacteria, algae, and other single-celled organisms that form biofilms on sand grains. These are the invisible glue of sandy ecosystems, binding grains together and forming the base of the food web. Some bacteria help break down pollutants, others produce oxygen, and still others are involved in nitrogen cycling. A single grain of sand can host thousands of bacterial cells, all contributing to the ecosystem in their own tiny ways. What makes all of this even more impressive is the shifting nature of sand itself. Unlike soil, which is often stable and layered, sand is in constant motion. It's tossed by waves, blown by wind, stirred by footsteps and tides. And yet life finds a way to thrive within it. Many of these animals have evolved to move quickly, burrow deeply, or cling tightly to survive in this unstable world. Sandy shores are often overlooked as habitats, considered lifeless compared to lush coral reefs or dense mangroves. But in truth, they are teeming with life, small, secretive, and perfectly adapted to a world that never quite sits still. It's a realm of tunnels and burrows, of soft chittering beneath the surface, of creatures that live their entire existence between grains of quartz and shell. Next time you're at the beach, consider taking a slower walk. Look for tiny holes and worm casts. Watch for the sudden flick of a crab leg or the shimmer of clams reburying themselves. Beneath the apparent calm, a secret society is hard at work, filtering, burrowing, eating, and surviving. Sand, for all its simplicity, holds an entire microcosm of life within its shifting layers, and it's still warm, soft, and great for picnics. We tend to think of sand as a backdrop, something passive. It's what we sit on at the beach, sweep off the porch, or occasionally find mysteriously lodged in our shoes weeks after vacation. But if you take a closer look at the world around you, the buildings, the glass, the roads, even the phone or computer you're using right now, you'll find that sand is not just background. It's infrastructure. It's technology. It's the quiet, granular foundation of modern civilization. In human hands, sand becomes just about everything. It starts with something surprisingly ancient: glass. Humans have been transforming sand into glass for thousands of years. The earliest known glass objects, small beads and ornaments, date back over 5,000 years to Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. The recipe hasn't changed much since then. Take silica-rich sand, Add a few stabilizers and fluxes like soda ash and limestone and heat it to temperatures over 1,500 degrees Celsius. What emerges is something that was once opaque and coarse, now made clear and smooth. Glass. We use it in windows, bottles, mirrors, microscopes, light bulbs, lenses and fibre optics. It shapes our cities and lets light into our lives. Modern glass can be bulletproof, self-cleaning, even solar reflective, and at its core is sand, mostly quartz, that hardy, high-purity form of silicon dioxide that has journeyed from mountain to plain and eventually into a furnace. But if glass is the artistic and elegant face of sand, concrete is its sturdy, unglamorous cousin. Concrete is, quite literally, what cities are made of. Highways, bridges, dams, tunnels, buildings and sidewalks, all of them rely on concrete, and concrete relies on sand. The mixture consists of cement, water and aggregates like gravel, and, you guessed it, sand. Not just any sand will do. The grains need to be angular and rough, so they lock together and give the concrete its strength. Desert sand, which is too smooth and rounded from constant wind blasting, is usually useless for this purpose. This creates an interesting problem. The world is running out of the right kind of sand. At first, that sounds absurd. Sand is everywhere, right? Beaches, deserts, playgrounds, it seems endless. But usable construction sand, especially the kind mined from riverbeds and coastlines, is in surprisingly short supply. And our demand for it is immense. The global construction industry consumes tens of billions of tons of sand each year, making it the most extracted solid material on Earth after water. We are in essence building the world out of itself, one grain at a time. Singapore, for example, has expanded its land area by over 20% using imported sand. China has poured more concrete in the past few decades than the United States uses in the entire 20th century. As cities grow, skylines stretch and roads unspool into new terrain, the appetite for sand keeps climbing. But there's a cost. In some places, the rush for sand has outpaced regulation. Illegal sand mining has become a serious environmental and political issue. Rivers are dredged, beaches stripped, habitats destroyed. Sand mafias, yes, that's the real term, have emerged in some regions, controlling access to sand with intimidation and violence. In places like India, Kenya and Indonesia, the consequences of unregulated sand extraction are being felt in eroding coastlines, collapsing riverbanks, and damaged ecosystems. Then there's the quiet irony of it all. We use sand to build homes that last decades, even centuries. But in extracting it carelessly, we destabilize the very ground on which we stand. Wetlands are lost. Rivers shift course. The grains that took millions of years to form are gone in an afternoon, mixed into mortar and poured into moulds. And still we need it. Modern technology has only deepened our reliance on sand. The digital revolution wouldn't exist without it. At the heart of every computer, smartphone and tablet is a chip made of silicon. That silicon is derived from silica. Once again, sand. Not just any sand though. To make semiconductors, you need incredibly pure quartz sand, often with more than 99% silicon dioxide. This high-grade silica is processed, refined, and eventually transformed into wafers that become the basis for microchips. In this way, sand powers everything from word processors to space probes. The grain beneath your feet at the beach might be chemically identical to the one inside a satellite orbiting Earth. It's a strange thought that something so ancient and humble is also the engine of innovation. From beaches to bandwidth, even in the realm of art and beauty, sand finds its way into human hands. Intricately layered sand art, delicate sand mandalas, and towering sand sculptures all speak to our fascination with this granular material. There's something poetic in the act of building something beautiful from something so impermanent. It's a kind of quiet rebellion against time, knowing the waves will take it, but building anyway. In industry, sand plays yet more roles. It's used in casting metal parts, in water filtration, in manufacturing ceramics, in the production of paint, plastics, and even toothpaste. There's sand in the texture of your car's dashboard, in the polish on your floors, in the coating of your paper. In many ways, we live in a sand-based society, even if we rarely acknowledge it. And when we're done building, we return to the beach, not to extract, but to rest. The same grains we melt, mould and mix into our concrete jungles also comfort our bare feet and cradle our umbrellas. There's something grounding about that. Sand is both a raw material and a gentle escape. It serves and it soothes. It builds our world and invites us to step away from it, if only for a while. But as with all natural resources, sand asks something of us in return. Attention. Not in the sense of worry or panic, but mindfulness. It's easy to think of sand as disposable, but like all geological materials, it's part of a slow, ancient cycle. The grains we scoop up today were once cliffs, reefs, or mountain flanks. They arrived through weathering, erosion, and time, shaped by processes older than cities, older than species. Treating sand as infinite has consequences. If we mine rivers faster than they can replenish, if we dredge beaches without restoring them, we risk more than running out of building material. We risk destabilizing coasts, draining aquifers, and unraveling ecosystems that rely on the quiet presence of sediment. So perhaps the best way to use sand is with the awareness that it took eons to get here. That the glass in your window, the concrete under your tires, the chip in your phone, all of it began as something shaped by wind and water. Not disposable, not quick, just incredibly patient. And while we will keep using sand, it is, after all, essential to progress, we can also learn to value it. To take only what we need, to respect the landscapes it comes from, and to remember that behind every structure we raise stands a quiet mountain, worn down to its finest form, one grain at a time. Long before anyone studied sand under a microscope or turned it into computer chips, humans looked at it with wonder. They walked across it, slept on it, buried their feet in it, told stories about it. Sand has always stirred the imagination. Something about its movement, its refusal to stay still, seemed to whisper truths too large to explain. It didn't take a scientist to see that sand is about time, about patience, about what lasts and what fades. To ancient peoples, sand was often more than a backdrop. It was a presence, a character in the story. For desert cultures in particular, sand wasn't just the ground. It was the canvas of life and survival, shifted beneath their caravans, swallowed trails, shaped oases, and sculpted the dunes that stood like frozen waves in an endless sea. And in those sweeping golden landscapes, stories took root. In the ancient Arabian Peninsula, sand dunes were said to move of their own accord, whispering to each other in the night. Nomadic tribes spoke of the jinn, mischievous spirits that rode on desert winds, reshaping the dunes to confuse travellers. If you ever got lost, it wasn't entirely your fault. The sand, after all, had a mind of its own. The Tuareg people of the Sahara, masters of desert survival, have long viewed sand not as a barrier, but as a living force. They describe it in poetry and song not just as a substance, but as a space, an open plain where silence carries meaning and footprints tell stories. In a place where the land moves beneath your feet, you learn to listen differently. The desert becomes not just geography, but philosophy. Ancient Egyptian culture also held sand in quiet reverence. The desert, or Deshret, symbolized both danger and eternity. It was the realm outside the ordered, fertile Nile Valley, a place of exile, but also of the divine. The god Set, often associated with chaos and storms, was linked to the red sands beyond civilization's edge. But sand wasn't just feared, it was also sacred. Egyptians buried their dead in desert sand long before they built pyramids. They knew what we're only rediscovering now, that sand is a preservative. The dryness of the desert slowed decay, offering a kind of stillness in death that matched the endlessness of the dunes. Farther east, in Japan, sand took on a more contemplative role. Zen gardens, or karasan sui, use raked sand and gravel to evoke water, movement, and impermanence. With a few stones and some carefully drawn lines, entire landscapes are suggested, rivers, waves, islands in a sea of stillness. The act of raking the sand, deliberate, meditative, becomes a way to still the mind, and when wind or footsteps inevitably disturb the design, becomes a quiet lesson in letting go. Nothing lasts, but everything returns. In these gardens, the sand is not decoration, it's reflection. It is meant to be reshaped, over and over, like thought itself. There's no final form, no perfect pattern, just motion slowed to something we can touch. A way of seeing the world not as fixed, but flowing. Even the simple hourglass carries a deep message. We tend to think of it as a timer, a novelty perhaps, but its symbolism runs deep. A slender waist connects two chambers, and through that narrow passage, grains fall, each one marking a moment, unrepeatable, irrevocable. In a world before digital clocks and glowing screens, watching sand slip from one bulb to another was a vivid reminder of time's flow. You could flip it, but never rewind it. A grain that had fallen was a moment spent, a breath gone. Hourglasses were used in ancient Rome, medieval Europe, and aboard ships at sea. Sailors timed their watches with them, measuring out shifts and speed. Philosophers saw in them a symbol of mortality, the upper chamber, the future, the lower, the past, and the slender neck, the now. Medieval paintings even show the figure of death, holding an hourglass instead of a scythe, as if to say, it's not the cutting but the flowing that brings things to an end. In Persian poetry, sand was often used to evoke longing. The desert, vast and unknowable, was a metaphor for separation and journey. The poet wandered across the dunes, heart heavy, each step a verse, each gust of wind a stanza. In many cultures, sand meant exile, but also transformation. You entered the desert as one person and emerged as another, if you emerged at all. In Aboriginal Australian traditions, sand plays a central role in storytelling. Sand drawings and ceremonial ground paintings are used to depict ancestral journeys, sacred paths, and connections between people and land. These artworks are often temporary, created for a ritual and then smoothed away, reinforcing the idea that stories, like life, are not fixed. They move, they fade, and yet they remain. Even the act of writing in the sand carries meaning. Whether it's a love note drawn with a stick or a child's doodle by the waves, there's an understanding that the message is fleeting. The tide will come, the wind will brush it away, but that doesn't make the act meaningless, quite the opposite. Writing in the sand is a gesture of being present, of marking the moment, however briefly. The philosophical pull of sand is timeless. Think of how often it appears in language, sands of time, shifting sands buried in sand, castles in the sand. Each phrase captures something human, a recognition of change, of fragility, of effort that may not last but still matters. And then there are the stories we tell ourselves, the ones whispered during long walks on the beach or quiet moments in the desert. Sand becomes a mirror. It reflects our thoughts, absorbs our questions. It reminds us that the ground beneath us is never as solid as we imagine. That time, like sand, slipped away whether we notice or not. Yet in that impermanence, there's a kind of peace. We don't need sand to be permanent, we just need it to be present. Perhaps that's why across cultures and centuries people have turned to sand not just for shelter or building, but for meaning. It teaches gently, it moves constantly, and it waits for no one, but it also welcomes everyone. It softens our steps, cushions our landings, holds the memory of where we've been, if only for a moment, and sometimes just for a breath. Standing on a dune or watching waves roll over the shore, you can almost feel it thinking quietly, calmly, as if it too remembers. There's something poetic about sand, the way it moves, drifts, clings to everything. It seems like the very symbol of impermanence. But given enough time, sand stops moving, it settles, it sinks, and in a quiet twist that only the earth could manage, it becomes stone again. This is the story of lithification, which is a fancy word for the process that turns loose grains of sand back into solid rock. It's a journey that spans millions of years, often invisible while it happens, yet utterly essential to the planet's ongoing evolution. And it all begins with a little bit of patience, a lot of pressure, and the subtle chemistry of time. Imagine a stretch of sandy shoreline, or perhaps the floor of a broad, slow-moving river. Over years, decades, centuries, layer after layer of sediment begins to pile up. Not just sand, but bits of silt, clay, and the occasional shell fragment, all gently settling from water or wind. With each new layer that's deposited, the weight above begins to build. This weight is key. It's what kicks off the process of compaction. Compaction is the first step in lithification. It doesn't squish the grains flat like pancakes, but it does press them closer together, reducing the empty spaces, the pores, between each one. Imagine a pile of tennis balls. At first, there's lots of space between them, but stack 100 more layers of tennis balls on top, and the ones at the bottom start to shift. They find more efficient ways to sit. They huddle tighter. The same thing happens with sand grains, though of course they're far smaller and a good deal less fuzzy. As the layers build, pressure increases. What once was open and loose becomes tighter, more compact, more solid. But compaction alone isn't enough to turn sand into rock. To really lock it together, we need a little help from chemistry. This is where cementation comes in. Cementation is a bit of a misnomer. It doesn't involve powdered bags of grey mix and a trowel, but rather the slow movement of mineral-rich water through the sediment. Groundwater percolates down through the layers, carrying with it dissolved ions, often silica, calcite or iron oxides. As the water flows through the compacted sand, these minerals begin to precipitate, forming tiny crystalline bridges between grains. Over thousands to millions of years, these connections grow stronger, hardening the once loose sediment into a unified mass. The result is sandstone. Not all sandstone is created equal, of course. The type of cement matters. Quartz cement made from silica tends to form some of the strongest, most durable sandstones, so tough they resist weathering for hundreds of millions of years. Iron oxide cement gives the rock a reddish or rusty hue, painting entire landscapes in warm tones. Calcite cement, made of calcium carbonate, is a bit softer, more vulnerable to erosion and acids, but it too has its place in the grand gallery of geological time. Sandstones can range from pale cream to deep orange to nearly purple, depending on their composition and the environment in which they formed. Some are fine-grained, almost soft to the touch. Others are coarse and gritty, still whispering of the beaches or deserts from which they came. And while the rock may be solid now, it's not silent. Look closely at a sandstone cliff and you can often read its story. Each layer, called a stratum, marks a chapter of deposition. Some layers are thick, others thin. Some show signs of ripple marks or cross-bedding, recording the ancient movement of water or wind across the surface. You might even find fossilized traces of life, burrows, footprints, or shells embedded in the matrix. These are time capsules sealed within the stone by the slow and steady work of lithification. It's fascinating to think that a beach we walk on today could, millions of years from now, become a mountain. That the sand stuck between your toes might one day be part of a towering red rock canyon, or that the swirling sands of a desert dune might harden into stone, only to be cracked, uplifted, and sculpted again by forces deep within the earth. Because that's the magic of the rock cycle. Nothing in geology ever stays the same. Sand becomes sandstone. Sandstone is buried deeper, heated and compressed, transformed into quartzite or melted into magma. That magma might one day cool into granite. And when the mountains formed from that granite begin to weather and crumble, the sand is born again. It's a cycle measured not in lifetimes, but in epochs. Mountains rise and fall, rivers carve valleys and fill basins. Oceans advance and retreat. And through it all, sand quietly moves, then rests, then hardens, then waits. Some of the world's most stunning landscapes are built from ancient sands that once flowed like water. Think of Zion National Park in Utah, with its towering Navajo sandstone cliffs, a formation that began as a vast desert of sand dunes over 170 million years ago. Those dunes were buried, compacted, cemented, and eventually lifted by tectonic forces to form a high plateau. Now, wind and water are carving into it again, revealing the delicate cross-bedding of long-gone desert winds frozen in stone. Or consider the red walls of Petra in Jordan, where ancient Nabatean tombs were carved into sandstone cliffs. The stone there began as sand laid down in the Paleozoic era, hundreds of millions of years before the first chisel ever touched it. Yet it still retains the whisper of its sandy origin, the soft curves and layered patterns that speak of sediment long settled. There's something comforting in the idea that sand doesn't disappear. It changes, it shifts shape, moves form, but it remains part of the Earth's deep memory. Today's beach is tomorrow's cliff. Tomorrow's cliff is next millennium's valley floor. Nothing is lost, it just waits to be reshaped. And for all the power of tectonics, pressure and time, it begins with something so small you could hold thousands of grains in your hand. A single grain of sand has no say in where it ends up, but together, layer upon layer, compressed and cemented, they form mountains, they build cathedrals of stone, they record the passage of ages. It's a reminder that small things matter, that slow processes can lead to extraordinary outcomes, and that sometimes the most unassuming parts of the world carry within them the greatest potential. Sand, in the end, is both a traveller and a builder. It roams, it gathers, and when the world settles down long enough, it becomes something permanent. Not forever, of course, but for long enough to shape the face of the earth. Sand does not shout. It doesn't erupt or crash or thunder its presence into the world. It has no bright plumage, no searing scent, no voice to declare what it is doing. But make no mistake, it is always doing something. It is always working, always shaping, always changing. If you could listen closely enough, you might hear it. Not in a literal way, perhaps, but in the hush of shifting dunes, in the lapping edge of a tide moving grains from one corner of the beach to another, in the faint scritch of wind brushing across an arid plain. There's a kind of music to it, a rhythm played in centuries rather than seconds. Sand is time's quiet sculptor. It smooths, reshapes, rearranges the world grain by grain, not with force, but with patience. It doesn't demand, it suggests, it offers, and eventually the earth listens. Stand at the edge of a windswept desert and you can see the effect. Dunes curl like sleeping beasts across the landscape, each one drawn by invisible hands. They are not static monuments, they are rivers of sand frozen only in the brief moment of our looking. Come back in a year or a decade and they will have moved. A little taller, a little farther, a little different. A story rewritten not by ink, but by wind. Along the coast the sea does the same. Not in crashing waves, though they help, but in the gentle pull and return in. Tides gather sand and redistribute it, sculpting beaches, reshaping barrier islands, building spits that stretch like sandy fingers into the water. It may take 100 years or 1,000, but coastlines bend to the will of sand. Mountains too answer to it. Not quickly, sand is polite, but persistently. Peaks are worn down by the tiniest of things. Frost that cracks rock, rain that carries particles away, roots that pry and wiggle their way into stone. All of it makes sand. All of it breaks down the vast into the granular. And once free, those grains continue the work, settling in valleys, running through rivers, building new shapes elsewhere. Even as mountains fall, plains rise. This slow rearranging is one of nature's most understated miracles. We're used to thinking of change in terms of events, storms, quakes, eruptions, but most of the Earth's transformation happens in silence. It happens slowly, imperceptibly, through the movement of sand. A hill becomes a slope becomes a hollow becomes a lake, and we barely notice. And yet sand notices everything. It carries records of past climates. The composition of grains can tell you what the world was like when they formed. A high quartz content might hint at a long life of weathering and travel. Bits of coral or shell speak of tropical seas. Iron oxides paint the grains red, whispering tales of oxygen-rich landscapes. Each grain is a relic, a fragment of something larger, something older. Scientists who study sand often do so with microscopes and sieves, sorting out the sizes and shapes, identifying minerals, running chemical tests. But you don't need lab equipment to appreciate its artistry. Just pick up a handful from anywhere in the world and look. Some grains sparkle. Others are matte and soft. Some are jagged. Others rounded from years of tumbling in wind or water. It is, in its own way, a gallery of natural sculpture. Thousands of tiny statues shaped by nothing more than time and movement. And then there's the metaphor of it all. We've always seen in sand a reflection of ourselves. The way it shifts, the way it gathers and disperses, the way it refuses to stay still. We build castles in it, knowing they will fall. We write names in it, knowing the tide will come, and yet we keep doing it. Perhaps because there is beauty in transience. Perhaps because sand reminds us that nothing has to last forever to matter. In the philosophical traditions of many cultures, sand represents impermanence. In some Native American stories, it is the blanket of the earth, soft, comforting and ever-changing. In ancient Buddhist thought, the sand mandala is a sacred, intricate design, painstakingly created over days or weeks, only to be swept away in the end. It's not a waste, it's a ritual, an understanding that all forms are temporary and that beauty is not diminished by its brevity. And yet sand also represents continuity. It is made from stone and it becomes stone again. It weathers mountains and builds new land. It has no beginning or end, only transformation. A grain of sand you step on today might have been part of a cliff 200 million years ago. That same grain might one day become part of a skyscraper, or a wave-polished pebble, or a fossil bed. It is small, but it moves through vast cycles, like stardust on vacation. There's something comforting about the idea that the earth does not rush. It is not in a hurry, and sand is its gentle reminder of that. A nudge to slow down, to let change happen at its own pace. To trust that even the smallest forces, when given enough time, can sculpt the world. Sometimes it's easy to forget that the landscapes we see as permanent are not fixed at all. The cliffs along the shore, the red mesas of the desert, even the rolling hills of farmland, all of it is in motion. Not in the blink and you'll miss it way, but in the deeper rhythm of the planet. Sand is the meter of that rhythm. It counts in centuries. It shifts by millimeters, but it never stops. Even when we're still, the sand moves. Even when we sleep, the dunes drift. Even when we believe nothing is changing, it is. That may be the most elegant part of sand's story. It doesn't fight to be noticed. It doesn't compete. It simply does its work, quietly, constantly, whether we look or not. So the next time you find a grain of sand stuck in your shoe or hiding in the folds of a beach bag, try not to brush it away too quickly. It's older than you, and it's not done travelling. It's been part of rivers and mountains and coasts. It's shaped continents and carved valleys, and in its own unassuming way, it's been sculpting the world while we've been blinking. Time doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just sifts softly through your fingers. Hold out your hand just for a moment, palm up, relaxed, as if you're waiting for something gentle to land. Now imagine a single grain of sand resting there, caught in a wrinkle of skin or balanced on the tip of your finger. So small you might miss it, so quiet you might not feel it. And yet inside that tiny speck is a story so vast, so ancient, that it humbles even the stars above. That grain may have started its life as part of a towering mountain range. Maybe it was once nestled deep in the heart of granite, a fragment of quartz encased in stone older than most life on Earth. For millions of years it sat in stillness, locked away in darkness, unmoving. Then the weather came. Ice, rain, heat, and cold in endless rhythm. Maybe it was a slow, creeping glacier that first cracked the mountain open. Or perhaps it was a bolt of lightning that struck a rock face and started a tiny fracture. Water entered, froze, expanded, repeated. A sliver of rock broke away. That sliver tumbled down a slope, nudged by gravity, shaped by friction, jostled by time. Eventually the chunk broke into pieces. Then those pieces broke again. Century after century passed, and what was once a bold, jagged shard became smoother, rounder, smaller. Not because it wanted to, not because it tried, just because it was part of the Earth, and the Earth never stops moving. Your grain of sand may have passed through a river next. Maybe it was lifted by a monsoon in the Himalayas and carried in a torrent down into the plains, tumbling and bouncing, rolling over stones and snuggling against silt. Each turn of the current wore it down a little more. Maybe it paused for a while in a quiet eddy, nestled among others, only to be swept back into motion when the river swelled again. It may have travelled hundreds of miles this way, always changing, never in a hurry. Perhaps it reached the sea. There, it was caught in the pulse of the tide, drawn in, pushed back again and again, day after day, year after year. Waves spun it in their foamy dance, polishing it like a gem until it gleamed softly in the sun. It might have settled on a beach for a while, maybe even long enough to warm beneath someone's feet or stick to the side of a damp towel. Then the wind came, or a wave, or the paw of a curious animal, and the journey resumed. Or maybe it was wind all along. Perhaps this grain drifted across the Sahara, lifted by the breath of the desert. Carried for days or weeks in the dry sky, it danced with other grains in mid-air, falling and rising in gusts. Maybe it helped build a dune once, settling quietly into the soft arc of sand. It would have sat there, pressed by new layers, warmed by sun, cooled by night, listening to the whispering song that some dunes make when they shift just until one day another gust lifted it again. It might have travelled farther than you'll ever go, crossed continents, changed shape, mixed with volcanic ash or coral fragments, or even glassy shards from ancient meteor strikes. It may have passed through the body of a burrowing worm or rested for a while inside the shell of a tiny crab. It might have been caught in a net, studied under a microscope, or trapped in the folds of someone's swimsuit after a summer swim in the Aegean Sea. And now, here it is, imagined for the moment in your hand. It looks like nothing, a speck, barely visible. It doesn't sparkle like a jewel, it doesn't glow in the dark, it doesn't hum or pulse or shift colour, but it is beautiful in its endurance. It has seen more than most of us ever will, felt more than we can name, and it is still not done. This grain in time will move again. The wind might lift it from a windowsill. A footstep might press it into the soil. A drop of rain might nudge it into a stream. It may join other grains, settle again, be buried under new layers. Maybe one day it will become stone once more, caught in sandstone, pressed into permanence for a while, and eventually, inevitably, it will weather and wander again. That is the quiet truth of sand. It does not belong to any one place. It is always between destinations, always becoming something new, and in that way, it mirrors us more than we might like to admit. We too are shaped by slow, invisible forces. We are rounded by experience, nudged by time, softened by contact. We drift, settle, get swept up again. We carry stories, some etched deep, some nearly forgotten. And like that grain, we are never quite finished. Maybe that's why holding sand feels grounding. It connects us to something ancient, something cyclical, something patient. In a world that moves quickly, sand reminds us that real change takes time, that transformation isn't always dramatic, that even the tiniest pieces matter. A single grain, trivial, maybe, overlooked, but multiply it by trillions, and it makes beaches, deserts, riverbeds, and time itself visible. Now take a breath. Imagine that grain returning to its journey, tumbled into a dune or drawn into the sea, quiet, steady, eternal in its motion, and maybe, just maybe, the next time you feel rushed or lost, or worn a little thin by the world, you'll remember it. The grain in your hand, still moving, still becoming. Close your eyes now, if you haven't already. Let your breath soften. Let the stillness settle in around you, like fine grains on a quiet shore. Whether you're tucked beneath blankets, listening in the glow of a low lamp, or stretched out somewhere with the night humming gently outside your window, you've wandered a long way tonight, and all for something as small as a grain of sand. But it isn't small, not really. Not when you know its story, not when you've drifted with it from mountains to deserts, from riverbeds to beaches, and back again into the cradle of stone. It's always moving. Even now in the dark, sand is sifting, dunes are climbing, tides are smoothing the edges of 1,000 coastlines. The world is never quite still, even if we are. And that's a comforting thought, in its own quiet way. You don't need to chase after it. You don't need to hold on. Just rest. Let it pass through your fingers. Let it whisper by. Whether we watch or not, whether we're awake or asleep, the sand will carry on. Thank you for coming along for the journey, for lending your imagination to a story made of time and tide. If you enjoyed this, if it brought you peace or wonder, or even just a bit of calm at the end of your day, I'd be so grateful if you'd tap that like button or subscribe to The Sleepy Scientist. It helps others find their way here too, one peaceful listener at a time. Before you drift off completely, I'd love to hear where you're listening from tonight. What part of the world are you in? And what time is it there? It's always a joy to read those little glimpses from across the globe. Now, let the sound fade, let the story dissolve like footprints on a beach at high tide. Sleep well and drift onward softly.